Welcome to the Metairie Cemetery in New Orleans, Louisiana, a place where history and architecture intertwine in one of the most unique burial grounds in the United States. As you walk through the cemetery, one of the first things you'll notice is that most of the graves are above ground. This is a distinctive feature in New Orleans, driven by the city's high water table. The soil is so saturated that traditional underground burials were prone to flooding, causing caskets to float back to the surface. To prevent this, above-ground tombs, often resembling small ornate houses, became the norm, creating a city of the dead that mirrors the one above. In this tour, we'll visit the final resting places of some of the most notable figures from the Civil War. We'll pay our respects to Generals John Bell Hood, P.G.T. Beauregard, and Richard Taylor, each whom left an indelible mark on the history of the South. Along the way, we'll also stop by the graves of other notable New Orleans who served during the Civil War, each with their own story to tell. So join us as we step back in time and explore the lives and legacies of these remarkable individuals. The first stop on our tour is at the grave of General Richard Taylor. Richard Taylor was born on January the 27th, 1826, into a family of military and political distinction. He was the son of Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States, and he grew up surrounded by the influence of his father's illustrious career. Despite this, Richard Taylor forged his own path in life, leaving a significant mark on American history. As we approach his grave, it's important to reflect on the role Richard Taylor played during the Civil War. He joined the Confederate Army and quickly rose through the ranks, demonstrating his strategic acumen and leadership. Taylor commanded troops in several critical battles, including the Red River Campaign in Louisiana, where his forces delivered a decisive victory against Union troops despite being outnumbered. After the war, like many former Confederates, Taylor faced the challenge of rebuilding his life. He became a prominent advocate for reconciliation, authoring a memoir entitled Destruction and Reconstruction, which offered a candid and insightful account of the Civil War and its aftermath. Richard Taylor passed away on April 12, 1879. His grave, a simple but powerful reminder of a complex and significant life. Our next stop brings us to the imposing Army of the Tennessee tomb, a memorial that stands as a solemn tribute to the Confederate soldiers from Louisiana who served in the Western theater of the Civil War. This tomb, constructed in the 1880s and captured in this 1910 photograph, houses the remains of 48 veterans, including some of the most notable figures of the Confederacy. Atop the tomb is a statue of General Albert Sidney Johnston, one of the most revered Confederate commanders. Johnston's leadership was pivotal in the early years of the war, but his life was tragically cut short at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Originally interred here, his remains were later moved to the Texas State Cemetery in Austin, where a grand monument now marks his final resting place. Though he no longer rests here, the statue on top of the Army of the Tennessee tomb continues to serve as a powerful reminder of his service and sacrifice. Below Johnston's statue, a Confederate sergeant is depicted about to read the roll call, a poignant symbol of the Louisianans who served under the command of the Army of the Tennessee. Each name called echoes the memory of those who fought and fell in some of the most crucial battles of the war. Inside the tomb, the crypts hold the remains of 48 veterans, including several high-ranking officers and notable figures from Louisiana. Among them is General Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard, whose tactical brilliance was instrumental in the early Confederate victories at Fort Sumter and the First Battle of Manassas. After the war, Beauregard lived in New Orleans, first at this house on 1113 Chartres Street, and then at 934 Royal Street. P.G.T. Beauregard died of heart disease on February the 20th, 1893. Another notable figure interred here is Charles Didier Dreux, the first Confederate field officer killed in action. A lieutenant colonel, Dreux led Dreux's battalion, composed of the first 5 companies to volunteer from Louisiana. He was killed at Young's Mill in Virginia during a failed mission to capture Union officers. Dreux's funeral in New Orleans drew over 30,000 mourners, a testament to his significance and the profound loss felt by the community. Thomas Sims, another figure buried here, was a distinguished Confederate congressman and a key player in Louisiana's political landscape, both before and after the war. As a senator in the Confederate Congress, Sims was deeply involved in shaping the legislation that governed the Confederacy. His contributions continued long after the war, including his role in the 1879 Louisiana State Constitutional Convention. Jose Quintero, buried in crypt number 2, was an attorney, journalist, and diplomat. He was also a confidential Confederate agent for President Jefferson Davis in Brownsville, Texas, Matamoros, and Monterrey, Mexico, where he played a significant role in establishing the cotton trade in Matamoros. Under his careful eye, more than 320,000 bales of cotton, about 1/5 of all of the Confederate cotton exports, were slipped past the Union blockade at the mouth of the Rio Grande and exchanged for valuable war materials in England and Europe. After the war, he wrote for the Galveston News and was the editor of the New Orleans Picayune. The Army of the Tennessee tomb is more than just a resting place. It's a monument to the memory of those who served and sacrificed. As we stand here, surrounded by the legacy of these men, we're reminded of the deep and lasting impact they had on both their time and ours. Let's move on to our next stop as we continue to explore the history etched in the stones of the Metairie Cemetery. Our next stop on the tour is the grave of Thomas Cortlandt Manning, a man whose life was marked by service as a jurist, military officer, and diplomat. Born in 1825, Manning attended the University of North Carolina before embarking on a legal career that would eventually lead him to Louisiana in 1855. As we walk up to his grave, it's important to remember that Manning was deeply involved in the events leading up to and during the Civil War. A delegate to Louisiana's secession convention in 1861, he joined the Confederate Army as a lieutenant, quickly rising through the ranks to become a lieutenant colonel on the staff of Louisiana's Governor Thomas Overton Moore. His leadership and legal expertise were further recognized in 1864 when he was appointed to the Louisiana Supreme Court, where he served on and off until 1886, after which he was appointed the U.S. Minister to Mexico. Manning continued in his diplomatic role until his untimely death in 1887. The grave of Thomas Cortlandt Manning is not just a monument to a man, but a testament to a life of dedicated public service. From the courtroom to the battlefield, and finally to the international stage, Manning's contributions were profound and far-reaching. Let's continue our journey through Metairie Cemetery as we uncover more stories of those who shaped our history. Our next stop on the tour is the Washington Artillery Monument, a towering tribute to one of the most storied military units from New Orleans. Dedicated in 1880, the monument honors the men who served in the Washington Artillery, a unit that played a critical role in over 60 battles during the Civil War, including the battles of First Manassas, Shiloh, Sharpsburg, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, and Cold Harbor. The Washington Artillery, whose motto was "Try Us," was known for its courage and skill in battle, and this monument serves as a lasting testament to their bravery. As we approach the monument, it's important to remember that while this structure stands as a memorial, none of the soldiers it commemorates are actually interred here. Instead, the monument serves as a symbolic gathering place where the legacy of these soldiers is preserved for future generations. One notable veteran of the Washington Artillery, however, is buried on the other side of the cemetery, Hamilton Dudley Coleman. Let's take a moment to reflect on his life and contributions. Hamilton Dudley Coleman was more than just a soldier. Born in 1845, he served with distinction in the Washington Artillery during the Civil War. After the war, Coleman returned to civilian life and eventually became a successful businessman. His influence extended into politics, where he served as a U.S. congressman from Louisiana from 1889 to 1891. Coleman's career was marked by his dedication to public service and his commitment to the people of Louisiana. His grave here in the Metairie Cemetery is a quiet reminder of a man who, like many others, transitioned from the hardships of war to make a lasting impact in peace. The Washington Artillery Monument stands not only for the unit, but also for the individuals like Hamilton Dudley Coleman, whose lives were shaped by their service. As we move on to our next stop, we carry with us the memory of those who fought, both on the battlefield and in the corridors of power, to shape the future of their state and their country. Our next stop brings us to the monument dedicated to the Louisiana Division of the Army of Northern Virginia. This impressive structure stands as a solemn tribute to the soldiers from Louisiana who served under General Robert E. Lee in the most famous Confederate Army during the Civil War. As we walk up to the monument, it's important to note that, unlike the Washington Artillery Monument, this isn't just a symbolic memorial. It's also the final resting place of many of the soldiers who served from Louisiana. The monument marks a tumulus, a large burial mound, where over 100 Confederate soldiers are interred. Their remains were gathered and reburied in a collective act of remembrance. Crowning the monument is a statue of General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, one of the most revered figures in the Confederate Army. Jackson's leadership and battlefield tactics were legendary, earning him a place in history as one of the most skilled military commanders of his time. His presence atop this monument serves as a powerful symbol of the courage and tenacity of the men who fought under his command, including those from Louisiana. Our final stop on the tour is the grave of General John Bell Hood, a name synonymous with one of the most famous fighting units in the Civil War, Hood's Texas Brigade. Known for his aggressive and fearless leadership, Hood played a pivotal role in many of the war's most intense battles. After the war, Hood chose to make his home in New Orleans, where he transitioned from military life to civilian pursuits. He first became a cotton broker, a common occupation in the post-war South, and later served as the president of an insurance company. Despite the challenges of Reconstruction, Hood worked diligently to rebuild his life and provide for his growing family. In 1868, Hood married Anna Marie Hennon, and together they had 11 children. However, their story took a tragic turn during the yellow fever epidemic of 1879, a devastating outbreak that swept through New Orleans, claiming thousands of lives. The Hood family was not spared from this tragedy. The epidemic first took the life of Hood's beloved wife, Anna Marie. Just days later, on August 30th, 1879, General Hood and his oldest daughter, Lydia, succumbed to the disease, passing away on the same day. The loss of Hood and his family members was deeply felt in New Orleans, where they were all laid to rest here in the Metairie Cemetery. As we conclude our tour, we leave with the stories of these individuals who, in life and in death, have shaped the history of this city and this nation.